Online advertising is a system of transactions that involve many different players. The user visits a publisher's website. The publisher notifies an exchange that the user is on the website. The exchange presents an opportunity to a marketplace that can buy that opportunity to show the end user the ad. And this is a simple example that's probably even less simple than the most simple realistic example. The transactions in online advertising are as opaque and rife with fraud as Wall Street, but it's even less regulated. Blockchain technology presents an opportunity to bring more transparency to the advertising ecosystem using a shared ledger. Ken Brook is the CEO of VidRoll, a video advertising company. Using his experience in the adtech business, Ken is working on Adchain, a shared ledger for adtech. In this episode, we explore adtech, blockchains, and Adchain. Life is too short to have a job that you don't enjoy. If you don't like your job, go to hired.com/sedaily. Hired makes finding a new job enjoyable, and Hired will connect you with a talent advocate that will walk you through the process of finding a better job. It's like a personal concierge for finding a job. Maybe you want more flexible hours or more money or remote work. Maybe you want to work at Facebook or Uber or Stripe or some of the other top companies that are desperately looking for engineers on Hired. You deserve a job that you enjoy because you're someone who spends their spare time listening to a software engineering podcast. Clearly, you're passionate about software, so it's definitely possible to find a job that you enjoy. Check out hired.com/sedaily to get a special offer for Software Engineering Daily listeners. A $1,000 signing bonus from Hired when you find that great job that gives you respect and salary that you deserve as a great engineer. I love Hired because it puts more power in the hands of engineers. Go to hired.com/sedaily to get advantage of that special offer. And thanks to Hired for being a continued longtime sponsor of Software Engineering Daily. Ken Brook is the CEO of VidRoll. Ken, welcome to Software Engineering Daily.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So today we're going to talk about advertising and the blockchain and Adchain, which is a advertising solution on the blockchain, and we'll get into all those things, but I think the place to start is the advertising ecosystem. We've done a bunch of shows about advertising fraud, which can mean a variety of things. What are the biggest problems in the advertising ecosystem?
I think the biggest problem at the highest level is I think we have a serious coordination issue in the industry. The ecosystem that makes up the online advertising industry consists of many different entities. And each entity, provides product and services, and they're all necessary, and they all make up the supply chain. But the underlying problem is the inability to coordinate, and it's an interoperability and open access problem. And as a result, there's opaqueness, lack of transparency in the supply chain. There's discrepancies. There's just a lot of issues that come out of, the complexities of our industry.
So there are lots of industries that are complex, like I think of finance or perhaps the hospital industry where you have all these different players that all have their own interests. Some of these industries end up working out. They function well enough. Some of them just have persistent problems. Actually, I guess all of them have persistent problems that are hard to solve. Why are these problems so hard to solve, the ones that exist in the advertising ecosystem?
I think all industries have their own sets of problems. And, you could argue there's fraud in finance, healthcare, there's a lot of issues. And, anywhere we see a supply chain with demand and supply and, this digital marketplace, you can see that, the supply chain itself might be just an antiquated, logistical model.
And so when you talk about the supply chain and you talk about the auditing process, so, when an ad gets displayed to somebody, what goes on in the back end is a complex web of exchanges. There's a lot of different transactions. There's selling, there's reselling. It is somewhat similar to finance in certain ways, but it's all digital. So you would think that, we can just audit all of this because we have a log of the entire digital transaction stream. So why is it so hard to audit this system and estimate what's going on?
That's right. Because it is digital, you think that, okay, well, we can just, audit this. There's the raw logs. We can just access the logs.
It's not like billboards.
Right. Billboards is how do you measure awareness? And I guess, it does come down to measurement. It's impossible to audit a digital advertising supply chain because you're working with such a limited data set. If you're requiring, data from each independent and self-interested entity in the supply chain, they're going to provide their data reconciled with their partner's data, with their partner's data. And there's also no KYC element in this industry because you don't know everyone you work with. So you have this kind of strange incentives that go on. And without a universal set of standards and an agreed upon, measurement of performance and the billable metrics, you just have these huge discrepancies.
Now, okay, but we do have some standards bodies. There's IAB. I think that's what is that? International Advertising Bureau or something?
Like the Interactive Advertising Bureau. So they're the governing body of our industry.
Right.
And, they do a great job providing these standards and guidelines. The problem, though, is that they're not enforceable. You provide these guidelines that each entity in the industry is supposed to follow, and that provides, everyone the ability to operate at scale, to make things more efficient. And we use these standard protocols, VAST, VPAID, MRAID, RTB, and this allows us to build technologies and achieve these efficiencies.
So IAB is one governing body. It is we define it as a governing body, but there's also players who are just so big that they can act as a governing body by virtue of how much deal flow they have. For example, Google, Facebook. Perhaps AppNexus. So what are the roles of these organizations that have so much deal flow going through them that they can impose some sets of standards?
I think that's a loaded question. I don't know if you saw the stats coming out of the IAB last year, but Google and Facebook were responsible for 99% of the advertising industry's growth. And that's staggering.
Yeah.
That's all of Q3. And what that tells me is that everyone else is playing a zero-sum game. And to be an independent ad tech player in this space today, it's tough. You're not only getting squeezed out by this duopoly, but you're facing all of these issues of fraud. And you're using the latest tools, but it's just, you're paying for the latest mousetrap, and it's an ongoing battle.
And my sense is that Google and Facebook, their systems are inherently a little more resilient to fraud because they have this login barrier that is sort of a stopgap against bot traffic because the bots can't get as good of a identity that...
I mean, to your point, they're massive. They have an end-to-end, solution for advertising, and they consist and make up the entire supply chain themselves. So when you talk about standards, they can be compliant with themselves because they pretty much own the industry. They have the audience, they own the content, they have all the data, and they have the tech, end to end to execute on these campaigns. The problem, though, is it comes down to trust, and just because they can be compliant with themselves, you're forced to trust that.
It is to some degree like what we ruled on after the financial crisis where, okay, we don't want these banks taking customer funds and doing risky bets with them that might impact. It's like they're playing both sides of the table in some sense. I mean, which is fine. I'm not saying that that's necessarily something to criticize, but it is something to take into account where they control the ecosystem. Like, let's be honest.
Yep.
And I mean, there's like global ad spend was about $542 billion in 2016. Do you have any perspective for how much of that is captured by Google and Facebook?
I mean, people would argue that they capture at least 75%.
Okay. Now, do Google and Facebook, do we have any perspective for how they look at fraud, how seriously they take fraud? Because, I mean, it's kind of hard to tell because in some sense, their incentives are not aligned with brand advertisers because the brand advertisers are spending money regardless of whether that ad is shown to a bot or if it's shown to a human. But in some sense, the long-term integrity of the companies depend on advertising remaining something that does have integrity. Do you have any sense for how Google and Facebook view fraud?
The sense that I gather, they take a very quiet approach to online fraud. I know that Google, as this publicly traded company, during their earnings reports and their statements, their public statements, they don't even mention online advertising fraud, whereas other independent and publicly traded ad tech companies state to the shareholders that fraud is a major concern. There is risk and liabilities when it comes to online advertising fraud, and given that company's position. Facebook is taking a stance on fake news. That's a kind of a big deal right now, given current events. And, they're constantly, battling measurement, the billable, metrics that they use, the formulas that they use to calculate, advertising performance across their network, and how they source audience data, how they monetize this data. However, there really is no alternative. If you have an advertising budget, you got to spend this budget. Where are you going to go? So it's really, in everyone's best interest, including the free internet, that there is distribution of power when it comes to, content delivery and monetization.
And we will get into that with the Adchain stuff, but a little more on Facebook. So I remember reading did you read Chaos Monkeys?
I started to. I'm halfway through.
Oh.
It's great.
Great book. Now, that book is about a guy whose company gets acquired by Facebook. It's a true story. His company gets acquired by Facebook. It's an ad tech company. And it's funny because you get the impression in his interactions with Zuckerberg doesn't really care about advertising. He doesn't care at all. He just wants to delegate it to other people mostly, which is fine. But it does make you wonder if a problem as complex as fraud that potentially inhibits growth of the company is really getting paid much heed at all. And, together with that, like the other sign, the disconcerting sign, I was talking to Shalin Dar, who introduced you and I. He's perhaps the strongest voice against ad fraud in the industry. That's why I like talking to Shalin so much. But what one thing he said about Facebook acquired a company called LiveRail for something like $450 million. The CEO left shortly after under circumstances. We don't know if he was fired or not, but basically the idea was they were doing video in such a questionable way. And so the question I'm getting at, LiveRail was a video advertising company, I believe. The question I'm getting at is, does Facebook care about this? Do they? Because I feel like I've talked to some people at Facebook, and they just have no idea what ad fraud is. They don't know that this exists. They understand, oh yeah, there's bots all over Twitter. Yeah, there's bots all over Facebook. But they don't seem to realize those bots consume advertising.
Right. And, there's fake profiles. And I have to believe that they care, right? I have to believe that they are actively, taking action against advertising fraud, and they're combating, fraud in many different ways because it exists in so many different forms. So I don't think Facebook is evil. I don't think Google is evil. But I also think that when you become so big and so centralized, these mechanics kind of take shape, and fraud exists, and you can't exactly just stop fraud, and your incentives are not to stop fraud. I mean, Facebook and Google are the wealthiest companies in the world. When you're printing money and that money's generated from online advertising, you have to look at all the incentives.
I was talking to Augustin Fu, who does a lot of ad fraud research, and he was telling me just how easy it is to set up a data center traffic to do fraudulent schemes. And you can just have the data centers running a headless browser, making fake Facebook accounts, making fake Twitter accounts, making convincing user behavior, and it's so hard to prevent. I mean, you think about a problem like Gmail, where Google is actually incentivized to prevent as much spam as possible, and you still get spam in your inbox. So you take a problem where their incentives are not aligned, where they actually make money off of fraud passing through their systems, and it's disconcerting. I'm with you that it's these are not evil companies. They're just big. They've got a lot on their hands, and it's well, do we really want to do we want to tackle this huge problem over here? Do we want to go focus on VR and messaging and bots, or chat bots, or do we want to focus on ironing out the fraud in our ecosystem that nobody's complaining about? Let's focus on the chat bots and the new newsfeed interface or something. It's like,
but if we don't do anything, if we don't focus on this problem, there's a logical conclusion. If you fast forward 5 years, what does that future look like for the internet? Because this issue is actually shaping, in my opinion, the internet.
Yes.
The way content is consumed, yes. The way it's distributed and monetized, the tactics that content creators and publishers use to generate revenue, the way Facebook operates and their algorithms and news feeds. It's actually changing the way we express ourselves online, the way we get our information, and the way these companies, build out their businesses. That could be a problem.
And advertising fraud propagates fake news. This is one subtle point, because when you create fake news that drives legitimate human traffic to a fake news site created by a Macedonian teenager that they just set up some WordPress site, set up beefrecipes.com, or they set up like trumpsnewrules.com, and it's just got a bunch of fake news about Trump or fake news about beef recipes. And then they get people to navigate from Facebook to the fake news site.
Right.
That can serve as a traffic laundering mechanism. So you get legitimate
Absolutely.
traffic, and then it becomes much easier to blast your site with data center traffic as well, and it becomes really hard for any kind of analytics system to be able to discern the traffic coming from a data center from the traffic coming from legitimate users that are clicking on fake news. So this problem is incentivizing people to create fake news because it makes the margins bigger.
And from that one blog or one site, they can make $60K a month.
Yep.
Easy.
Yep.
If you were to go to the brands that actually were monetizing and buying that inventory, they were buying these impressions and serving out their campaigns. If you ask them, this is the content that your ad was viewed, would they be okay with that? And a lot of advertisers are like, absolutely not. We don't want to associate our brand, with this content or these views and opinions and this, clickbait headline and this, this WordPress site that's just, capitalizing on fake news, and the opinions are purely exaggerated just to monetize that content, drive traffic, and to get paid out.
Simplify continuous delivery with GoCD, the on-premise, open-source, continuous delivery tool by ThoughtWorks. With GoCD, you can easily model complex deployment workflows using pipelines, and you can visualize them end-to-end with its value stream map. You get complete visibility into and control of your company's deployments. At gocd.io/sedaily, you can find out how to bring continuous delivery to your teams. Say goodbye to deployment panic and hello to consistent, predictable deliveries. Visit gocd.io/sedaily to learn more about GoCD. Commercial support and enterprise add-ons, including disaster recovery, are available. Thank you to GoCD, and thank you to ThoughtWorks. I'm a huge fan of ThoughtWorks and their products, including GoCD, and we're fans of continuous delivery. So check out gocd.io/sedaily. Now, I think people who have been listening to this podcast for a while understand this problem at this point, and we've recapped it pretty convincingly. Basically, it is a super sophisticated ecosystem of different players. There's data center traffic, there's all kinds of fraud, and there's brands who are slowly becoming educated to this problem. You have like Procter & Gamble or Nike or some like Gap.com, right? Like these different brands that are slowly but surely realizing that most of their brand advertising, well, I don't want to say boast, can't prove that with numbers, but probably most of their brand advertising dollars are getting wasted on fraud or ineffective advertising strategies. Over time, they're realizing things. Let's start to talk about the solutions, potential solutions,
Right.
one of which is Adchain, which you are working on. In order to get into Adchain, let's talk a little bit about blockchains, because we've done a bunch of shows about Bitcoin, blockchains, Ethereum, this kind of stuff. But just give a recap. From an abstract point of view, you are not a programmer, correct?
Correct. No, I'm not.
So this will be a perfect opportunity for you to explain what a blockchain is from the utility point of view, not from the in the weeds, how does this work on a technical level? What is the utility of a blockchain? What is a blockchain?
Sure. A simple way to think of the blockchain is just an improved database. It's a shared source of truth, and most importantly, it's decentrally owned. So you can use this new type of database and build out these, decentralized applications, and you can align incentives and provide on the trade layer or this application layer an opportunity to have a healthy ecosystem with aligned incentives. And it's not that you have to trust, the technology or the protocols. And another unique characteristic of blockchain is it's very secure. So through cryptography, you're able to ensure the integrity of this data and the way it's stored is intact. And the beauty of it is it's a trustless environment. So when you use a blockchain, it's not limited in terms of, okay, if I have this web application, I have to abide by some centralized platform's, policies. Or if I'm using their APIs, like you're kind of limited in a lot of ways. So this kind of unlocks a lot of opportunities for web developers to build out, unrestricted applications.
Absolutely. And let's get into some of those. So you listed the ideas of why a blockchain is this new sort of database. Start to talk about the abstract, appealing features of a blockchain. Like we hear about blockchains potentially being used in finance or digital rights management, for example, for artists who are creating music. What are the appealing features of a blockchain when you talk about at a slightly higher level, the business use cases?
Right. I think the appeal is really, again, the ability to expose the business logic. And from a business standpoint, a lot of value is derived from, your secret sauce, your intellectual property, and it could be some proprietary thing that you own and sell. Blockchain isn't about, closed proprietary secret sauce. It's more about transparency and openness. And the opportunities, there's these new opportunities now exist where instead of relying on, let's say, going back to Facebook, their proprietary algorithm, you could use your own algorithm. You can decide, how you want to view, your newsfeed, how Twitter works, how Instagram or Snapchat works. You can distribute and decentralize all of these applications. It's all peer-to-peer, and it's so that the incentives really from on the business side is much different. It's fundamentally different than what currently exists.
What is Adchain? This is the thing that we're here to talk about. It's a blockchain solution relating to advertising. Just explain what Adchain is.
Sure. So essentially, Adchain is a set of protocols and standard interfaces that's built on Ethereum, the Ethereum blockchain, to provide common business needs for online advertising. And I like to say that it's advertising's coordination platform, because we don't want to bring Adchain to the industry and position ourselves as potential competitors to any of the entities that currently make up the industry. This is something that empowers everyone to add value and to operate in this healthy ecosystem and have a hygienic supply chain instead of just this opaque black box of just everyone is no one trusts anyone, and a lot of the questions that the advertisers, brands, agencies are asking can't be answered, and the incentives are all out of whack. So this is kind of a way to provide a standard that allows for fair trade for the entities to not have to trust each other. And that's the beauty of the blockchain, is it's so centralized, but it's decentrally owned. And it's kind of this weird way of thinking about how to approach a lot of the problems that plague the industry. It's a fundamentally different approach. we're not just looking at the trade layer of the industry where we have these protocols. We work with DSPs, SSPs, exchanges, and then you have safety vendors for viewability and bot detection. Yeah, and Shalin Dar is great. Like, he knows this stuff better than anyone. But the problem is much deeper than where everyone is looking and where everyone's talking about. And when you talk about, data center and driving traffic and the headless browsers, recently, Methbot was discovered. And this botnet was doing just that. It was mimicking real people. It was hosting, web pages, and they were representing these advertising opportunities coming from legitimate sites like ESPN or CNN or USA Today, and driving traffic to these pages. And they were generating $3 to $5 million a day, from this botnet. And White Ops discovered it, but they're scratching the surface. They're kind of just taking a look and they're going, okay, there's a lot of fraud here. There's a lot of stuff going on that no one is really looking deep enough to really understand or see.
Let's use Methbot as an example. This, I think, Russian botnet that was just able to drag in millions and millions and millions of dollars. There's a great New York Times article about Methbot, about this botnet. I'm going to put that in the show notes. Let's take Methbot as an example. How would Adchain be a preventative measure against the problems that Methbot is taking advantage of?
Sure. So we're using what's called smart contracts, and these smart contracts are written in a blockchain language called Solidity.
That's the Ethereum language.
And I'm probably correct. That's right. And what this will allow us to do is when we run campaigns, when advertisers have their media spend planned out and they work with their agency or their trade desk, or they bring this internally and use some form of an advertising bidder, they're using this technology for display or video campaigns, they would get to see the entire supply chain, and they would start to see patterns. And they work with safety vendors like White Ops, who ultimately discovered Methbot. And White Ops would not have to make so many assumptions with their bot detection scripts and algorithms. They would be able to run their proprietary bot detection algorithms on a complete data set of the complete supply chain, because we're tracking at the trade level with Adchain's beacons, and we're encrypting that data, and then we're using our Adchain, smart contract and state channel blockchain, technology and implementation on top of Ethereum to track and store this advertising data, and it's permissionable. So when we open up this data to White Ops, they're running their script on a complete data set that's ubiquitous across the entire supply chain and not just one data set. Because even White Ops, admitted that this is just, a sample of data from just our clients. And we're releasing this publicly because we need the entire industry to help us combat this. And the thing about what we're doing with Adchain is that when we talk about governance, when we talk about regulatory bodies in our industry, they're not able to regulate their policies because they don't have the ability to regulate at a technology or protocol level. They provide guidelines. This is the difference, is we have this technology now utilizing blockchain that allows for enforcement at a protocol level. So that way when something like Methbot is discovered by White Ops, they don't just announce it to the industry saying you have to manually blacklist all of these known IPs across every single adtech entity in the industry. Whereas with something like Adchain, you could flip a switch and all of a sudden botnet stops. Botnet's still running. Like, advertisers are still spending and botnet is still running.
Okay, so you're pointing out a lot of interesting things, because this is essentially the dream of what Ethereum smart contracts provide. It's basically, here is the way that this business works, not only codified in like a contract that is written, but in computer code that enforces that contract in an electronic way. And what you're saying is that this provides less room for ambiguity, because if you have to be, I'm IAB compliant, I'm complying with this API or this set of standards, that's a lot different than saying yes, I am willing to integrate with the Adchain smart contract system that enforces the safety of traffic passing through my system. Is that correct?
That's correct. I mean, in the sense of smart contracts, code is law. And when you break it down to the lowest level, binary, ones and zeros, it's math. And you can trust math. And what we want to do is we want to bring this, undeniable trust to the industry, because that's what it lacks. It lacks the ability to trust. And, this is the only, in our opinion, this is not just the optimal solution, but we feel like this could be one of the only solutions to solve all of these problems. And it's not that they have to trust us. It's just, here's this utility. Here's this, this platform for you to coordinate with all of your partners that you already work with.
Right.
And that's the approach that we're taking.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense to me. Like, as you were telling me about this over the phone, like, I started to understand, like, and it's not necessarily a boil the ocean approach, because you could see companies adopting this over time, sort of in the same way that they've adopted things like these verification systems. Are you a human? Or what are the other ones? Moat, I think. Is Moat one of them?
For viewability.
For viewability.
Moat's another big one. There's double verify.
Adchain. Right. So these things where you like throw in a JavaScript tag on your page to verify that the visitor to your site is a human or is closer to a human, more likely to be a human. These are differentiators for publishers who want to sell traffic to advertisers, and you could see the Adchain process also being a certification process where you say, okay, this site interfaces with Adchain, and then there's a network effect there where the more companies that integrate with the Adchain system, the smarter the Adchain system is. So you get this positive feedback loop. Am I understanding the rollout process correctly?
You're right. Yeah, absolutely. And the more adoption, the stronger the chain. And the more powerful Adchain becomes, for the industry. And when you look at the publisher side, if they interface with Adchain, they can they could protect themselves from malware, which is a big problem, for publishers. And then on the advertising side, they get to audit the entire trail of the campaign and have transparency into the supply chain of this advertising campaign. And when you hash, or if you run an advertising creative, like the actual creative file through Adchain, what you could do is you execute this smart contract. You essentially save this or hash this creative file in the form of this smart contract. And if somewhere along the supply chain, this creative file changes, it will not serve. It will not be tracked because it has been altered. And that is going to be exciting for a lot of advertisers, because a lot of the opportunities or advertising placements are modified. Where, for example, going to video, if you as an advertiser think you're buying large player traffic or impressions, you're actually running your video ad in a small player. So the dimensions of the player size have been altered somewhere in the supply chain. And you're paying for large player premium advertising, inventory, when you're actually paying for really small, video in banner replacement video. And this is just like, if the dimensions don't match, the ad doesn't serve. And it's that simple.
When you are continuously deploying software, you need to know how your code changes affect user traffic around the world. Opaque system helps companies with their end user experience, focusing on availability and performance. Test, monitor, and optimize your applications with Opaque system. With Opaque Zebra Tester, Opaque Load Test, and Opaque Synthetic, you can ensure that your apps and APIs work for all your users at any time around the world. Opaque Zebra Tester provides local load testing for individuals, small teams, and enterprise DevOps teams to get started quickly and scale load testing as your needs evolve. Opaque Load Test ensures that your app can serve traffic even under high load. Apica Synthetic sends traffic to your website and your API endpoints from more than 80 different countries, ensuring wide coverage. Right now, you can go to softwareengineeringdaily.com/Apica for a webinar about the real ROI of API testing. You can also find past webinars, such as how to optimize websites for fast load time. Go to softwareengineeringdaily.com/Apica to find the latest webinars on load testing and lots of other topics, and check out Apica's system for testing, monitoring, and optimization. Thanks again to Apica for being a sponsor of Software Engineering Daily. So one thing, when we talk to people about Ethereum or like Ethereum related things, there's like people who have very substantive things and they have substantive idea. Well, so there's a spectrum. There's like the substantive ideas. There's the substantive ideas that have been implemented or they're starting to implement. They actually have code behind their words. And then there's like the non-substantive ideas. And then there's the non-substantive ideas that nonetheless have code written for them. Where does Adchain fit here? Do you have progress? Has the code been written? Do you have any integrations going?
Yeah, we have a prototype now, and we have a pilot running, as we speak. We're tracking, impressions, and we're storing performance data in Ethereum, and we have an interface for our participants in this pilot to check performance. We have the ability to automatically resolve any disputes in the performance metrics. Because a lot of the advertisers right now are auditing, their campaign spend, for 2016. There's just a lot going on in the industry. And, this is a neutral utility that answers a lot of the questions. And it allows for everyone to look at the same set of data and to agree to the billable metric. And if there's a discrepancy, there's these market signals that surface. And if there's major discrepancies somewhere in the supply chain, it's exposed. And over time, this market-driven approach will essentially resolve itself. And we're not saying we can stop fraud. Adchain doesn't stop fraud, but what it does is it allows the industry to align incentives and to show, hey, I'm adding value, and over time de-incentivize fraud and just push it out of this new protocol.
Absolutely. So what has been the feedback from the people who have integrated with Adchain?
Right. So the feedback is, I would say, overwhelmingly positive. However, depending on who you are, there is a little bit of caution here. And, we don't expect everyone to, first fully understand what it is we're doing here, because it is complicated. I mean, adtech itself is extremely complicated. And now we're taking, blockchain technologies, which is extremely complicated, and we're bringing the two together. So having to explain to the industry what exactly blockchain could mean for them and why this is important when we talk about fraud, you kind of have to unwrap that. But for the most part, if you have this new approach and you talk to an advertising agency saying this is how you can secure media spend and this is how you can earn new advertising business by providing value and proving it mathematically, not just saying you have to trust us, we're going to watch after your campaign budgets and look after your best interests, because that sales pitch is getting old.
Yes.
And advertisers are demanding, more. And if you can't prove ROI, advertisers are going to go elsewhere. And, this is a solution for the agency and the advertiser, as well as the rest of the supply chain.
Absolutely. I mean, can you talk more about that? Because I feel like there are probably people listening there's probably at least one or two people listening who are building some sort of business on a blockchain, and they're trying to figure out, is it too early, or what is the narrative that I should try to sell to my customers to make sure that I am conveying this product correctly so I can know whether it's too early? Maybe can you talk?
Yeah, sure. I don't think it's too early. If you look at the adoption of blockchain, and you look at this growth rate, and you look at the early days of the internet, leading up to the internet as we know it now, there's this adoption rate. Blockchain is taking off because of the need for it.
Well, that's the thing. That's the thing is that people are like I remember talking to I talked to multiple Bitcoin investors when I was doing the first series of shows about Bitcoin. This was like a year and a half ago, and I think Bitcoin was like at this place in the hype cycle where the people who didn't really understand it but had invested in it nonetheless were starting to get fatigued, and they were like, I'm done with Bitcoin. Bitcoin's not trendy. And it was like, you must not understand it then, because like this is a fundamental technological breakthrough. This is not like a maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. It's like, no, this is just a matter of time until it works.
Right. So I think once you understand, you can't unknow it.
Right.
And it's just a matter of time. It's inevitable. Those who understand it know it. And there's also the fear of missing out. So there's this strong force that's compelling, major corporations to jump on the blockchain before they even know what it is. Fintech and finance is a great example, because as soon as Bitcoin, was this new exciting, digital currency, and then banks were looking at this new underlying blockchain technology as a way to save billions of dollars, they're like, let's do this. And it's not a matter of if, it's just how can we start to integrate this new technology into our day-to-day operations.
Explain how a bank saves billions of dollars with blockchain.
So if they want to audit, that's costly. And if they want to reconcile, data across their global bank, that's costly. There's these efficiencies that are realized when you use a central database that's encrypted and secure like blockchain. If you can unlock that for your organization, there are tremendous savings. And that's like almost instant. You realize these savings. And then you can build value on top of this new database. And I think that's the real appeal to web developers that are kind of exploring, blockchain technologies, is that you don't necessarily have to understand how to write Solidity. You don't really fully have to understand smart contracts, because there's really only a few people that truly understand and are good at writing smart contracts. So it's something that is complicated. But if you understand the framework, and the tooling around blockchain is quickly evolving as well, and there's more and more documentation, there's more and more of these projects and developer tools that exist. And as long as these tools exist, and we can start to educate web developers, they can start building out their own web applications utilizing their existing skill sets. And this is the opportunity for web developers, is to build out a decentralized application on top of Ethereum or Bitcoin, and start to realize these values. And it's not just the savings and efficiencies, but also unique business opportunities and the ability to build out an application that's decentralized. And it's fundamentally different. So I think once web developers really start to understand what this is and why it's different, I think that's when we're going to start to see an explosion of just more applications, where I could imagine that people start to use web applications that interface with the blockchain, and they don't even know it.
So I want to zoom out here because we're running up against time. I'm obviously very interested in the advertising business, partly because I'm working on an advertising company. And what I wonder about is, like, what are the fundamental changes that are going to occur in advertising in the next 10 years? Like, I think, like, so Adchain definitely makes a lot of sense to me. But at the same time, I do wonder, is the search for metrics-driven advertising, like CPM-driven advertising, is this ultimately going to be a dead end? Because it feels like the bot problem feels unsolvable to me. It feels like something that is like, it's too hard. Or, I mean, maybe that's like the pessimistic side of me. I'm normally like such an optimist with anything related to technology, but the bot problem is so pernicious, the incentives are so poorly aligned, that it seems like there is an alternative thread that we go down where advertisers just say, this is just a crappy way to be spending our budget, where we look at how many views we've gotten, how many clicks we've gotten. Let's try something where it's like, more like the good old billboard days, where it's like, how creative is this advertisement? Like, how many people are talking about this advertisement? How viral is this advertisement, in the sense that, like, does this ad actually connect with people on a human level? Ads should be entertaining, ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, we are going kind of full circle when we're talking about advertising. And when we talk about the current, standard billable metric of cost per, 1,000 advertising impressions, there's nothing better at generating impressions than bots. There's nothing more efficient than a machine to generate scale. So when we standardize the CPM, cost per thousand, metric as the billable metric for digital advertising, and all of the supply chain entities that make up the online advertising industry get paid and pay out on a CPM. Even the safety vendors that detect fraud and bots are paid on a CPM. These incentives are not in the best interest of preventing fraud. If anything, it's like your only incentive is to do away with fraud as much as your competitor. Fraud needs to exist for a lot of the industry. And when you look at something like blockchain, you could start thinking of a different payment model where it's not CPM, it's more of like attention. So you have these like attention markets that would exist potentially. And from a fundamental level, it will reshape the industry. And I think it would be for the better.
Yeah. All right, Adam, or Ken. Why did I call you Adam? I think I was going to say Adchain. I was going to say Adchain, and then I said Adam. Okay. Anyway, not getting enough sleep. This presidency is really eating up my sleep habits. Okay. Well, Ken.
I forget which comedian said it, but he said the presidency is supposed to age the president. It's not supposed to age the people. Because I'm exhausted too. I'm exhausted.
Yeah. It's like you wake up every morning and it's like, I thought that the cravings that Facebook drove me, like to see what notification from like some old high school friend or some cute girl that might have liked a picture, I thought that was like as dopamine rushing as it could get. But flipping over to Apple News and seeing what kind of crazy stuff Trump has cooked up is like a new level of wake up, get to my phone anxiety. All right. Okay, cool. Well, thanks for coming on the show, Ken. I wanted to talk about VidRoll some, but we didn't make. I don't know if people are interested. They can check out VidRoll. Definitely check out Adchain. And thanks for coming on Software Engineering Daily.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks to Symphono for sponsoring Software Engineering Daily. Symphono is a custom engineering shop where senior engineers tackle big tech challenges while learning from each other. Check it out at symphono.com/sedaily. That's symphono.com/sedaily. Thanks again, Symphono.